Before there were forests, before there were oceans filled with whales or skies filled with birds, there was nothing, nothing but rock, gas, and dust drifting through the silent void. And from that emptiness came the atoms of life, forged in the hearts of ancient stars, scattered across space, and drawn together by the newborn Earth. Over billions of years, these atoms would learn to copy themselves, to endure catastrophe, to breathe, to see, and to build a living world. This is the full story of life's journey, from stardust, to the first spark, to the awakening of the biosphere itself. The story of how the Earth became alive, and how that life became us. In the beginning, there was darkness, not the stillness of night, but the vast, lightless void between the stars. Here, in the silent reaches of space, dust and gas drifted aimlessly, the residue of ancient suns. For eons, they floated, cold and unseen, scattered remnants of titanic explosions that had ripped apart worlds long before Earth had formed. The elements that would one day breathe, think, and wonder were already there: carbon, forged in the hearts of dying stars; nitrogen, birthed in stellar furnaces; oxygen, the child of nuclear fusion. Every atom a survivor of unimaginable heat and force, flung into eternity by the death throes of a star. In time, gravity began its quiet work. Invisible threads pulled the dust together, coaxing it into great spirals of gas and ice. Vast clouds condensed, spinning tighter, growing hotter. From the heart of one such cloud, a new star flared into being, our Sun. Its birth was violent, scattering shockwaves that stirred nearby matter into motion. Around it, debris whirled, rock, ice, and metal colliding in a ballet of destruction and creation. Tiny grains became pebbles, pebbles became boulders, and boulders, through countless impacts, formed embryonic worlds. In the third orbit from the newborn Sun, a sphere began to take shape, our Earth, still molten, still raw, still unfit for life. The young planet was a vision of chaos. Molten rock surged across its surface, seas of magma glowed beneath choking clouds. Asteroids rained from the sky, each impact shaking the crust, vaporizing oceans that had barely formed. The moon, newly born from a catastrophic collision, hung larger and closer than it does now, its gravity tugging fiercely at Earth's tides of molten stone. As the centuries of deep time slid forward, the planet began to cool. The crust thickened, though still fractured and restless. Steam from the molten interior vented into the skies, forming dense clouds. Rain fell for the first time, and it fell endlessly. Centuries of storms, sheets of water hammering the scorched surface, hissing against rock still warm from the fires below. The rain collected in basins and valleys, forming vast oceans of gray-green water. These seas were not calm. They boiled and churned beneath an atmosphere thick with methane, ammonia, carbon dioxide, and water vapor. The sun's light was weak through the haze, but lightning split the skies in blinding arcs. Volcanoes rumbled across the continents to be, pouring rivers of molten rock into the seas, releasing more gases into the swirling air. This was no gentle cradle for life, yet it was here that the chemistry of existence began its slow work. In shallow pools along the shorelines, the water mixed with minerals leached from rocks and the products of volcanic exhalations. Ultraviolet light from the sun pierced through breaks in the cloud cover, striking the surface. Lightning delivered sudden bursts of energy, rearranging simple molecules into more complex forms. From hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen came the first organic molecules, amino acids, sugars, fatty acids, and nucleotides. They were small, fragile things, but they were the alphabet of life, the letters from which all future living stories would be written. Storm after storm, tide after tide, these molecules accumulated. They clung to grains of clay, where their structures could be protected, concentrated, and forced into closer contact. On these mineral surfaces, bonds formed and broke, again and again, in a restless chemical dance. Time was abundant. Days became centuries, centuries became millions of years. In that long expanse, some of these molecules began to link into chains. Amino acids formed peptides, nucleotides joined into strands of RNA, molecules capable not just of existing, but of carrying information. The world was still barren to the eye. No green, no movement but the churn of the seas and the shifting of the winds. Yet beneath the surface of the water, in those quiet microcosms of chemistry, something remarkable had begun, the first stirrings of self-replication. A strand of RNA, by chance, formed a shape that could attract complementary molecules, guiding their assembly into a copy of itself. It was imperfect. Copies varied, some shorter, some longer, some unable to replicate at all, but in the chaos, a primitive form of selection emerged. The strands that could make more of themselves became more common, those that could not, vanished into the sea. Encased within bubbles of fatty acids, these replicators found shelter. The ocean was a harsh place, with currents and UV rays tearing at fragile chains, but inside their tiny lipid spheres, chemistry could proceed undisturbed. These were the protocells, not yet alive as we know it, but carrying within them the essential processes that would one day define life. The tides carried these protocells far and wide. Many were destroyed against rocks or dissolved in the deep, but some drifted into environments that favored their survival. Near volcanic vents at the ocean floor, hot mineral-rich water gushed into the cold deep, creating chemical gradients ripe for energy-harvesting reactions. Here, protocells adapted, incorporating simple metabolic pathways that allowed them to store and use energy. Above, in sunlit shallows, others learned to harness the light itself, primitive photochemical reactions setting the stage for future photosynthesis. The Earth itself was both enemy and ally, delivering catastrophes in the form of asteroid strikes, superheated steam blasts, and volcanic winters, while also providing new niches and resources in the aftermath of destruction. This cycle of creation and annihilation repeated endlessly. With each round, protocells became slightly more robust, their molecular machinery more efficient. Chains of RNA folded into structures that could catalyze reactions, primitive enzymes that sped up the chemical steps of replication and energy storage. There was no consciousness in this age. No intention, no awareness. Just molecules obeying the laws of physics and chemistry, driven by energy gradients, by chance encounters, by the blind persistence of replication. Yet these forces, over millions of years, shaped complexity from simplicity. At some point, the exact moment lost in the abyss of time, the threshold was crossed. A protocell, battered by countless generations of trial and error, possessed all the hallmarks of life. It could store information, replicate with reasonable fidelity, and harness energy to maintain its structure. From that point onward, life was no longer a fragile accident, but a self-sustaining process, capable of evolution. Still microscopic, still invisible to any possible observer, these first true cells began to spread. They competed for resources, for space, for the chemical building blocks that drifted in the oceans. They mutated, producing new variations, some better adapted, others destined to disappear. Earth's surface was changing as they did. The continents shifted under the slow dance of plate tectonics. Volcanoes continued to shape the land, and the oceans deepened. The air remained hostile to modern lungs, rich in methane, laced with carbon dioxide. But it was the perfect stage for microbial dominance. The seas that once held only the restless dance of chemistry now teemed with invisible pioneers. In their membranes and genetic codes lay the blueprint for everything to come, from towering redwoods to the human mind. All of it, every breath, every heartbeat, traced back to this chapter in Earth's history, when dust from ancient stars, tempered in the crucible of a newborn planet, found a way to copy itself. It was a quiet beginning. No grand announcement, no visible transformation of the landscape. Just the soft, continuous unfolding of a process that would, in time, paint the earth with forests, fill its skies with wings, and one day, look up at the stars to wonder how it all began. The oceans had changed. They were no longer only the restless cauldrons of chemistry that had birthed life, they were now living seas, though no human eye would ever have recognized it. Invisible to any observer, the waters swarmed with pioneers, microscopic cells, self-sustaining, self-replicating, already locked in an ancient race to endure. Billions of years ago, in the absence of eyes, wings, or leaves, these cells were the masters of Earth. They existed not as individuals but as populations, vast clouds of life drifting through sunlit shallows, clinging to mineral outcrops, swimming blindly through the blackness of the deep. They were simple by the standards of what would one day evolve, tiny capsules of genetic memory encased in fragile membranes. Yet their simplicity was deceptive. Within them churned a molecular machinery capable of transforming raw elements into order, of taking the chaos of a young planet and bending it toward continuity. This was the age of the silent architects, an age in which the building blocks of future complexity were designed not by thought, but by survival. The endless experiments of evolution. Life had crossed the threshold into self-perpetuation, but it was still subject to the merciless arithmetic of chance. Each cell was a trial, a variation on a theme. Some had better enzymes for copying their genetic material. Others had sturdier membranes that kept them intact in hostile currents. Many were swept away before they could divide, others left descendants that spread across the planet. In the shallows, sunlight powered primitive photochemical reactions. Certain cells had pigments capable of capturing photons, using that energy to drive the construction of sugars from carbon dioxide. These photosynthetic innovators thrived where light could reach, creating pockets of abundance in a world otherwise limited by chemical scarcity. In the darkness of the ocean floor, life had taken a different path. Here, near the mouths of hydrothermal vents, cells harnessed energy from chemical gradients, the natural difference between the mineral-rich vent water and the cold ocean around it. They transformed dissolved gases into fuel, creating tiny oases of life in an otherwise barren abyss. Everywhere life appeared, it altered its surroundings. Waste products accumulated. Resources were consumed. Some cells adapted to these changes, others perished. The endless cycles of replication, mutation, and selection continued, slowly refining life's chemistry. The invention of cooperation. At first, life was solitary. Each cell existed for itself, reproducing and spreading with no awareness of others. But in some places, cooperation emerged. Cells began to cluster together, forming thin films on rocks or mats across tidal flats. These microbial communities were more than just crowded neighborhoods. In close quarters, cells could exchange useful molecules, shelter one another from hostile conditions, and recycle each other's waste into resources. The mats became living factories, processing sunlight, minerals, and gases in intricate cycles. Layer upon layer of dead cells accumulated beneath the living surface, trapping sediments and forming structures that would endure for billions of years. Even today, these fossilized microbial mats, stromatolites, stand as silent monuments to this ancient era. Through cooperation, life learned its first lesson in complexity, that survival could be enhanced by interdependence. The age of trial by catastrophe. Earth was not a stable host. Catastrophe arrived often, and without warning. Asteroids large enough to boil the oceans crashed into the planet, releasing energy beyond anything life had ever faced. Massive volcanic eruptions blotted out sunlight for decades at a time. Shifts in the young planet's climate plunged it into global freezes or baked it in heat. Each disaster culled the living world, extinguishing countless lineages. Yet some always endured. In the aftermath of destruction, survivors spread into newly opened niches, exploring environmental possibilities left vacant by extinction. Through this cycle of devastation and renewal, life became more resilient. Cells evolved mechanisms to repair damaged genetic material, to resist toxins, to endure extremes of temperature and pressure. Some entered dormant states, waiting out bad conditions in protective shells until the world softened again. In surviving disaster, life acquired the raw toughness it would need for the long journey ahead. The rise of metabolism's web. In the earliest days, cells relied entirely on energy from their surroundings, harvesting what chance provided. But with time came innovation. Some cells developed internal metabolic pathways, sequences of chemical reactions that allowed them to generate and store energy in more controlled ways. This was the birth of metabolism's web, the interconnected network of chemical cycles that today powers every organism. Cells learn to tap into the breakdown of sugars, the oxidation of minerals, the conversion of light into usable fuel. The invention of these pathways unlocked new habitats. Cells could now survive in environments that offered less energy, because they could extract more from what little there was. They could also store reserves, surviving through lean periods until conditions improved. With metabolism came efficiency, and with efficiency came expansion. The biosphere, the totality of life's presence on Earth, began to thicken. Oceans were no longer just water, they were liquid ecosystems. Shorelines were lined with invisible fortresses of cells. Even the air, thin and unbreathable, carried drifting microscopic life. The oxygen revolution's first whispers. For hundreds of millions of years, Earth's atmosphere was hostile to anything that required oxygen. It was thick with methane, carbon dioxide, and nitrogen. Oxygen, if present, existed only in trace amounts. A reactive gas that quickly vanished into chemical reactions with rocks and minerals. But deep within the ranks of the silent architects, a few lineages had stumbled upon a radical method of harvesting energy, oxygenic photosynthesis. By splitting water molecules with the help of sunlight, these cells released oxygen as a waste product. At first, the oxygen they produced simply reacted with iron dissolved in seawater, precipitating out as rust-colored sediments on the ocean floor. Layer after layer of these banded iron formations accumulated, silent geological records of oxygen's slow emergence. Eventually, as the iron was used up, oxygen began to linger in the water, and then in the air. Its concentration was still low, but the chemistry of the planet had begun to shift. The hidden architect's legacy. As oxygen levels crept upward, life's course was set toward a future of greater complexity. Oxygen was a double-edged sword, lethal to many anaerobic cells that had thrived in the old atmosphere, but a potent source of energy for those that could harness it. Mutations gave rise to enzymes capable of surviving oxygen's reactive assault, and to pathways that could exploit its chemical potential. Slowly, oxygen-tolerant cells began to spread, pushing older forms into ever smaller refuges. This transformation was not quick. It would take hundreds of millions of years for oxygen to reach levels that could support the complexity of multicellular life. But the foundation was laid. Every ecosystem, every metabolic trick, every survival strategy that would later shape the living world had its prototype in this age. The silent architects had set the template: life could endure disaster, adapt to change, cooperate for advantage, and reshape the planet itself. Toward the dawn of a visible world. The seas still looked empty to the naked eye. To imagine standing on a shore in that age is to picture a coastline barren of plants, a waterline without fish, a sky without birds. But beneath the surface, the groundwork for all those things was being laid. It was a world where the architects had no blueprints, no intentions, no awareness. Yet in their endless replication, in their silent experimentation with form and function, they had forged the tools from which forests, coral reefs, and civilizations would one day arise. The architects did not know it, but their age was drawing toward its close. Soon, oxygen would pour into the atmosphere in quantities great enough to alter the climate and the chemistry of the seas. New forms of life, more complex, more energy-hungry, would appear. The silent reign of the microbial world would continue, for microbes would never vanish, but the monopoly on Earth's surface would be broken. The next chapter of life's story would be painted in new colors, with new shapes, and new possibilities. For billions of years, they had ruled in shadows, invisible and unheralded. But their legacy was eternal. Every breath taken by every creature that would follow carried the imprint of their labor. They were the first engineers of the living world, the keepers of the spark, the silent architects who built the stage for all that was to come. The Earth was readying itself for a transformation. For billions of years, life had been confined to the invisible realm, a quiet, microbial world without leaf or limb, without predator or prey. Yet in the depths of its oceans, in its tidal flats and vents, life had been busy with slow invention. The silent architects had reshaped the planet's chemistry, and in doing so, they had prepared the way for something new. The signal of change was written in the sky itself. Oxygen, once only a trace in the atmosphere, had begun to accumulate. It was no longer swallowed entirely by reactions with rock or seawater, it lingered, growing in concentration. The shift was slow by human reckoning, yet by geological standards it was sudden, a planetary turning point known as the Great Oxidation Event. The air turns dangerous, and powerful. To the anaerobic life forms that had dominated Earth's early history, oxygen was poison. Reactive and corrosive, it tore apart the delicate bonds of molecules, rendering them useless or deadly. As oxygen levels crept upward, entire microbial lineages were driven to extinction, unable to survive the new chemical reality. But oxygen's danger was also its power. For the cells that evolved to use it, oxygen became the ultimate fuel, a molecule capable of releasing far more energy than any earlier chemical pathway. Those who mastered aerobic respiration could grow faster, move farther, and store more energy for future use. The stage was set for a new type of life to emerge, larger, more complex, more capable than anything the planet had yet seen. The dawn of the true cells. From within the turbulent microbial world, a remarkable innovation appeared, the eukaryotic cell. These were not the simple, single-compartment cells of their ancestors. Instead, they were intricate, with internal membranes separating different functions. Their greatest leap came from a moment of symbiosis, the merging of once independent cells into a single organism. Primitive aerobic bacteria took up residence inside larger host cells, becoming permanent tenants. Over time, they evolved into mitochondria, tiny powerhouses that churned out energy with unmatched efficiency. This merger was no small event. It provided the surplus energy needed to support larger genomes, more complex internal machinery, and eventually, the ability to form multicellular bodies. The partnership between ancient host cells and their bacterial guests would endure forever, present in every animal, plant, and fungus to come. Oceans of color and light. As eukaryotic cells spread through the seas, they diversified into astonishing forms. Some developed chloroplasts, descendants of photosynthetic bacteria, and began turning sunlight into sugar on a grander scale. These early algae painted the oceans in shades of green and gold, forming the first true plankton blooms. The seas became richer, layered with food webs more complex than ever before. Microscopic predators grazed on algae, and other predators fed on them in turn. Though still too small for the human eye, these interactions created a dynamic living system in which energy and matter cycled through countless hands, or rather, countless membranes. In shallow coastal waters, dense algal communities formed mats that swayed in the currents, anchoring themselves to rock. Sunlight danced across their surfaces, feeding growth that could be measured in visible layers. The great snowball and the test of resilience. But Earth's progress was never smooth. Around 700 million years ago, the planet entered one of its most extreme ice ages, the snowball Earth events. Glaciers advanced toward the equator, covering oceans with ice. Sunlight struggled to reach the waters below, and photosynthesis faltered. Life clung to existence in the few refuges that remained, cracks in the ice, geothermal springs, and thin bands of open water near volcano-heated regions. Many lineages vanished, yet the survivors carried forward hard-won adaptations to extreme cold and scarcity. When the ice finally retreated, the biosphere rebounded with vigor. The oceans filled again with algae and plankton, and the survivors of the freeze spread into the newly opened spaces. Catastrophe, as it had so often in Earth's history, had cleared the way for new forms of life to thrive. The leap to multicellularity. In this post-Ice Age world, evolution took one of its most dramatic steps. Some eukaryotic cells, already capable of cooperation in colonies, began to specialize their functions. Instead of every cell living for itself, groups of cells took on different roles. Some focused on gathering energy, others on reproduction, others on defense or structure. This was the birth of multicellular life. Simple at first, thin filaments, floating spheres, it was nonetheless a revolutionary strategy. Multicellularity allowed for larger size, more intricate shapes, and the division of labor that would one day give rise to organs and nervous systems. The oceans began to host creatures that could no longer be counted on a single-celled scale. The Cambrian stirring. As oxygen levels rose further and nutrients cycled more efficiently, life's pace quickened. By around 540 million years ago, an evolutionary storm was brewing, the Cambrian explosion. Within a geological blink, the diversity of life skyrocketed. In these seas, bodies took on armor, spines, and shells. Eyes evolved, sensing the light in ways no cell membrane alone could. Limbs appeared, propelling creatures through the water in pursuit of prey or safety. Predation, once rare, became a driving force of adaptation, and ecosystems grew dense with interdependence and competition. The biosphere, once silent and unseen, now teemed with motion, form and color. Life colonizes the land. For hundreds of millions of years, land had been a barren expanse of rock and sand, shaped only by wind, water, and ice. But as plants evolved from algae, they found ways to survive above the tide. Moss-like pioneers crept across damp shorelines, drawing water from the air and ground. These early plants altered the land just as the silent architects had once altered the seas. They trapped sediments, created soil, and began releasing oxygen directly into the air above the waves. Their green spread invited other life, fungi, which partnered with plant roots, and small arthropods, which grazed on the new vegetation. The land, long empty, was awakening. Forests and the deep breath of earth. Over time, plants grew taller and more complex. Vascular tissues allowed them to transport water efficiently, freeing them from the limits of size. The first true forests rose, their canopies creating shaded floors rich in ferns and mosses. These forests pumped oxygen into the atmosphere, driving levels higher than at any previous time. Insects and amphibians grew to remarkable sizes, supported by the abundance of breathable air. With forests came cycles of carbon storage and decay, altering the planet's climate and locking away vast amounts of atmospheric carbon in wood and soil. Earth's living skin had matured into a system capable of shaping its own environment on a global scale. The biosphere as a living system. By now, life was no longer a scattering of isolated forms but a tightly woven network, the biosphere. Every organism played a role in this planetary system. Plants and algae captured sunlight and formed the base of food webs. Herbivores transferred that energy upward. Predators kept populations in balance. Decomposers recycled nutrients back to the soil and sea. Energy flowed through the system in a constant rhythm, from photon to sugar to predator to decay, over and over again. Matter cycled endlessly, but the patterns of life's interaction grew ever more intricate. From the silent past to the questioning present. In the deep timeline of the Earth, humans arrived only in the final heartbeat. Yet in our cells, in our blood, in our breath, we carry the signature of every chapter before us. The oxygen we inhale comes from the descendants of those first photosynthesizers. The mitochondria in our cells are the direct heirs of the ancient bacteria that once found shelter in larger hosts. The carbon in our bones was forged in the heart of a dying star before Earth itself existed. The biosphere today is a far cry from the sterile rock that once circled the newborn sun. It is a living skin wrapped around a planet, breathing, changing, and enduring. Every forest, every reef, every soaring bird and flowing river is part of a story that began with the quiet alignment of molecules in a shallow tide pool. The awakening of the biosphere was not a single moment, but a long and patient accumulation of change. From stardust to spark, from silent architects to visible worlds, from oceans to forests, life has been an unbroken thread. And as we look out into the cosmos, searching for other worlds where that thread might exist, We carry with us the knowledge that our own story is both unique and universal, a testament to what can happen when chemistry learns to persist, when persistence learns to adapt, and when adaptation, in time, awakens into wonder. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.